anybody go anywhere. Melinda made an earlier report, and I'm here to have a follow-up report. It's all good news, so it's fine. The books that were taken outside have been returned. The Tucson police have been told to stand down. And over Kim's objections, the cocktail party will go on this afternoon. So everybody, there's good things coming. We're running a little bit late, so I've been asked to tell you that we're going to go to 3:15 so that our next speaker gets the full time, and I think he's going to need every minute of it. We're going to love every minute of it. So it's my honor as a member of the Terry J. Lundgren School Board of Advisors, Executive Committee, to introduce today's speaker. I'm Kathy Manson with the National Retail Federation, and if you don't know who that is, talk to me after the meeting and I'll sell you a membership. Dale Dauten, and I think he has the most fabulous title for this, The Curious Case of the Dead Idea and Other Business Mysteries. Anybody who can write something like that is going to be a great speaker. So despite the fact this is when the hamburgers and chicken and the baked beans and all set in, everybody just shake it off a little bit and we'll all stay awake and Dale will do his best to keep us awake. He has a fascinating background. He's the founder of the Innovators Lab, an organization devoting developing and testing new ideas in management and marketing, whose member organizations include Caterpillar, Avnet, General Dynamics, and NASA, and at least one of those is still in business today. We know it because they're still in the sky circulating. Dale authors 2 newspaper columns, both nationally syndicated, The Corporate Curmudgeon, gotta love it, and Kate and Dale Talk Jobs. They appear in over 100 newspapers around the country. In addition, Dale has authored 5 books. The three most recent, copies outside, are The Max Strategy, about which Harvey Mackay said it will challenge every preconceived notion you have about making your career take off. The Gifted Boss, which prompted Ken Elkins, former CEO of Pulitzer Broadcasting, to say, Dauten makes you rediscover the joy missing in your career. And finally, The Laughing Warrior, which was birthed out of the breakthrough ideas formulated by the Innovators Lab, in which participants are encouraged to think like a hero and work like an artist. Dale's background as a manager with major corporations and executive with consulting companies and the head of his own marketing research firm have allowed him to opportunity to work with leading organizations including McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, and 3M. More recently, he's done innovation work with Georgia Pacific, United Auto Group, Kraft Foods, among others. None have been asked to speak to the Congress. All are asking for bailouts. In addition to his consulting work, Dale's writing has given him the opportunity to interview top business leaders, innovative management thinkers, as well as coaches and political figures. This unique combination prompted author Steve Chandler to write, Dauten's work clearly soars ahead of its time. He is the Obi-Wan Kenobi of business consultants. Obi-Wan Kenobi, fasten your seatbelts. Dale Dauten.
Oh, man. Thank you, Kathy. That was delightful. More than you wanted to know. Listen, one of the things I'm going to talk about today is energy flows in organizations. And I know it's a low-energy moment in the day, so I'd like to take just about 10 seconds. If you want to stand up, please stand up and stretch a little while I get myself together here. Okay, we need to get going. I'd like to start with a revelation, what is really a dark secret of organizational life. And if you pay attention to it, I think it will change forever how you view your work. And here it is. You ready? This is the secret. Jobs are designed to be dull. Now, it isn't that there's some evil HR laboratory somewhere designing tedious work. It's just the nature of organizations. Picture, if you will, that you are going to design a new organization. And what are you going to do? You're going to take a sheet of paper, you're going to make an org chart, you're going to have little boxes, and on those boxes, in those boxes are going to be functions. Functions you know people can do, that people have done before. And then who are you going to go and hire? Well, you're going to hire people who have done those jobs. In fact, when the ideal job candidate, you're in the interview, you're talking to the person, you describe the job, and they say, oh, nothing to it. I've done that at 3 different companies. I could do that in my sleep. And then we wonder why so many people sleepwalk through their jobs. Now, this isn't to say these are easy jobs. A whole lot of easy work is a hard job. So what can we do about it? If we aren't careful, we are going to spend all of our time catching up. We're never going to quite get there. And think of what that does to the quality of your work. What I had not foreseen was the gradual day, weakening the will, leaking the brightness away. Isn't that beautiful? That was written by Stephen Spender 100 years ago, and yet describes perfectly what we're up against. When you go back to the office tomorrow afternoon or Monday, what are you going to find? Oh, you're going to find a whole lot of voicemails, some emails, some mail. You're going to find people who say, thank God you're back. I got a question for you. You are going to be slapped upside the head by the gradual day. And you're going to go back with all these wonderful ideas. Think of the level of material you're hearing here today. You go back with all this, your brightness renewed. And what happens to it? The gradual day happens to it. And you leak the brightness away. So I want to talk to you today about how to keep ideas alive, how to keep them from dying, how to overcome that gradual day. And I want to start by taking us out to the tennis courts for a minute. I play a little tennis. My sons and I took a lesson every week for year after year from a guy named Eric Mitchell. And I was out playing one day and I saw, oh, there's Eric over there. So I go over to say hello and I fall in watching this little kid. He was out there watching this kid, and any of you who've had anything to do with youth sports know that occasionally you see these little phenoms. And this kid was amazing. He's playing a college-age player, beating him. And finally I lean over to Eric and I say, is this the one? Meaning, is this the prodigy every coach dreams of finding? And you know what he said to me? He shrugs and he said, oh, Dale, it's not how good they are at any given age. It's where they stop improving. I never thought about youth sports quite the same way. I never thought about my own work quite the same way. Because I heard that, and then I have to go back and ask myself, well, where did I stop improving? And then I start looking around me and saying, well, what does that guy do better now than he did a year ago? That's a hard question. So it got me thinking about learning curves. And you see a learning curve in a textbook, and it's this beautiful elongated S shape. Sigmoid curve, I call it, right? Beautiful elongated S shape from whatever zero knowledge up to this perfection or mastery. But you know, as I looked at people in corporate life, that's not where it ends. They rise up to this perfection or mastery, they get up to that upper line on the graph, and boink, they bounce off of it and actually work at a level below their own best performance. Why? Well, because their boss says to them things like, geez, oh man, I hate to stick you with this, but it doesn't have to be anything special. Ugh. What an assignment is that? Or they come in and they say, you know, we're in a hurry for this. Why don't you grab that report we did a few months ago, dust it off, change the names, good enough. Now, if you aren't careful, you're going to spend your life worrying about good enough. Goes along with catching up. Those are the pair that define most work today. Catching up, good enough. So if we could go back to my graph, I see graphs in my mind. I draw them in the air. You can tell my background's in economics. You go up, you bounce off the upper line, you settle down, but I want to add another line to this imaginary graph. A dashed line, the good enough line. The line that says this is minimum acceptable performance. So we bounce and we're still above the dashed line, okay? We're doing all right. It's good enough. We're getting by. And when I drew this graph in my mind, I realized I had seen the difference between great bosses and ordinary bosses. Most of you probably read that wonderful book, Good to Great. Before it came out, I wrote a book called The Gifted Boss, and I did a comparison of ordinary managers to these great bosses, what I called the gifted ones. And I saw the difference between the two types there in that graph. You know what it is? The ordinary boss, now these are good bosses, people trying hard to do the right thing, but the ordinary boss spends a lot of time at that good enough level. In fact, they are defenders of the good enough. They are down there making sure that nothing falls through the cracks. They are dealing with employees who are underperforming. They're dealing with people who aren't doing quite as much as you expected of them. They are dealing with those exceptions. They're checking, are we on time, are we on budget? They're making sure nothing falls through. And what is that function? They're kind of border patrol agents. It is a police function. And most managers spend most of their time in police functions. And Trish was just talking about the amount of paperwork people have at the store manager level. Well, that's everybody making sure nothing falls through those cracks. That's everybody making sure that they've got their border protected. Well, what does the gifted boss do? Gifted bosses, now they've figured it out. First off, the number one principle I found when I wrote this book, I said, it turns out that great employees and the best bosses want the same things from a workplace. They both want freedom. Freedom from management, mediocrity, and morons. In other words, they want to be free to do terrific work. And gifted bosses know enough to hire great employees and let them do terrific work. Cuts down that whole bottom level, the good enough. You would never say to a great employee, the kind I study, the really terrific ones, the best of the best, you wouldn't say to them, it doesn't have to be anything special. They'd say, well, give it to somebody else. I do special. When you want something special, come see me. Those are the great employees. They'd be insulted by that. And that's where you want to be. Those are the people you want to hire. And so it frees the gifted boss up to operate up at that upper line. We bounce off this mastery. They aren't saying, oh, it's just whatever, pull out the old report. They're saying, how can we do this better than it's ever been done before? That's the conversation a gifted boss wants to have. The problem is the gradual day. The problem is jobs are designed to be dull. We have this delayering of organizations, so there's more and more pressure. How do you free up enough time to even ask that question? I know one gifted boss who, whenever they give somebody the assignment, they say, I'd like you to work on this problem. Don't bring me one solution. I want 3 solutions. How many companies have time to do that? Well, these gifted bosses, part of their gift is figuring out how to free up enough time to do that. And one of the ways they do that is they change the conversation in an organization. They have a different culture. For years, I resisted that word culture. It always seemed to me kind of inflated, like we were pretending to be anthropologists writing about business. But I had a guy who made me accept it because he made me realize, you know what culture is? Culture is just what people talk about. The conversation in the office is the culture. And if you think of that, then you say, oh, how do I change the culture? Oh my God, I need a stack of books. I need Accenture. No. Well, you might need Accenture. But what you need is to change the conversation. Now, that's doable. That's something you can control. And how do you do that? Well, first off, I was inspired to this thought by a guy named Charlie Hughes. He was the guy who was head of Land Rover when it was introduced in the U.S. and went on to head Mazda. And he said, you know, if you don't choose a culture, if you don't create a culture, you get one you don't want. Isn't that interesting? And you know what the culture is he was talking about that you don't want? You know, if you don't give employees something interesting to talk about, you know what they talk about? How lousy management is. What else the company could be doing for them. They talk about themselves and their jobs and what's wrong with it. So he said what I wanted to do was get people talking about, this at Mazda, how we could beat Toyota. That's the conversation I wanted. And then he realized to get people talking about that, he had to create situations where it became relevant and they could actually think about beating Toyota. So I renamed that conversation, the culture you don't want, the default culture. That's the one you get if you don't create one. So how do you create it? And by the way, those of you who aren't leading teams, you can start to change a culture yourself because you can change the conversation. You can start asking the interesting questions. In fact, you can ask the interesting questions of your boss, or you could ask the interesting question of yourself. This is something I discovered when I got an assignment from one of the big telecommunications companies. They said, Dale, we'd like you to come speak to a conference we're having for our top salespeople. They have 2,000 salespeople. And they take the top 10%, 200, and they're going to take them to Maui. They bring their spouses. They say, oh, it's going to be great. You'll love it. We're having Huey Lewis and the News perform. We're having all these parties in Maui. It'll be great. We want you to come. God, it was a better world before this whole AIG thing, wasn't it? Maui will be back, though. You're going to have a meeting in Maui long before 2020, trust me. Okay. So they say, come. But I say, well, I'd love to come. Sounds like fun, but I'm not a sales trainer. I don't know that I can help your top salespeople sell any more stuff. And they said, we just have to have some kind of educational component. Talk about whatever you want. So it was a better world. So I go over there, but I say, we have this motto around our office. We call it the circle of helping. And we always ask, how can we help? So I'm thinking, well, okay, I can talk about whatever I want, but how can I be of use to these people? So I think, well, I'll talk to the sales managers and find out what it takes to be a great salesperson in a top telecommunications company. And then I'll talk about those things. I'll find a way to bring those to life because a lot of the best learning is relearning what you already know. And maybe I could do that at least. So I talk to these sales managers, and they start telling me what it takes to be a great salesperson is perseverance, positive attitude, focus, understanding sales is a numbers game. I'm dozing off on the phone. I mean, this is boring, obvious stuff you hear 100 times. So I get permission. I say, well, maybe I could bring this alive, some of these concepts, if I could find some cool stories from these 200 people, and then I'd get them to tell some of these stories, get them involved. We'd do an interactive thing. That would be cool. So I send an email to these 200 salespeople. 130 responded. Tells you something about great salespeople. And I'm reading through looking for stories about perseverance and focus and these other boring things. And there aren't any. Nobody, not a single person mentioned perseverance or positive attitude or anything. So then I say, well, what did they talk about? I'd ask them to describe their best sale ever. I'd ask them, what do you think makes you a great salesperson? Those kind of questions, all open-end. And then I look back through, and you know what the word that appeared most? The words laugh and smile. And right after that came the word help, and after that came the word feelings. They said things like, I want my customers to feel helped. They said things like, if I can get my customers to laugh, I'll have a great day. Now, isn't that marvelous? They had changed the conversation themselves. Their bosses, what I call the old language of success, we're still talking about perseverance, positive attitude. They weren't talking about that. They're talking about the customer's feelings. And if they make the customer laugh, well, what is that? They're worried about the customer's attitude, and then theirs will take care of itself. So I saw there that there's this old language of success, this new language of success. The new language is an emotional one. It's based on the other person. And yet, the managers, these people who are supposedly controlling the culture, controlling the conversation, stuck in this old language. You don't have to be stuck there with them. You can jump ahead to the new language. In fact, what I'd urge you to do is to find a few good touchstones. And what I mean by that are phrases that you say over and over again that influence your behavior, that shape how you think of the world. One thing I've discovered is great bosses make very good use of these touchstones. By the way, I've fallen in love with that word. Let me tell you the origin. Maybe you will too. Touchstone comes from when there were traveling merchants, and they would get paid in precious metal, usually gold. And they needed some way to assess the quality of the gold they were getting paid in. So before they'd go out on their travels, they would take a piece of stone, usually slate, make a mark with 24 karat gold, 18 karat gold, and so on. Then you're out in the field, somebody's going to pay you in gold. You touch the gold to the stone, and you instantly assess its worth. So now the words come to mean these touchstones. These are ideas that allow you to assess the worth of something, allow you to put whatever you're doing in context. You with me? Okay, here's how it works, and here's how they save so much time. I got to interview a guy named Alan Rosenshine. He's head of BBD&O, big ad agency. They have GE, Pepsi, FedEx, all these giant accounts. And I know that part of their procedure is they always present 3 test campaigns to their clients, and then the client picks. And I said to this guy, Alan Rosenshine, I said, Alan, it must drive you crazy when you've done some really edgy, terrific, cool new ad campaign, and the client picks the boring, ordinary, safe one. And he says, no, not a problem. It's not? How could it not be? He said, well, we always tell each other, never show the client anything you aren't delighted to run. There's one touchstone. I think of them as actual stones. There's one touchstone. 2, as my old boss used to say, life's a negotiation. Okay, there's 2 touchstones. Now let's put them into action and see how much time they save and how they change this conversation, this coaching conversation that Trish says we need more of. Here's 2 versions of it. Say you have a young woman who's new to the organization, and she's just met with a client, and she was disappointed that they didn't pick the campaign she wanted, okay? So she comes into the office of the average good boss, the good manager, and says, oh, I am so frustrated. Just got out of the meeting. They picked the wrong campaign. Oh, I just want to strangle them. Now here she is. She wants to have a gripe session. And she has now a good boss, a good manager. And what is he thinking? Oh, this is a good new talent. I need to help her. I need to be a good listener. I'll be an active listener. We just had a seminar on active listening. I'm gonna listen to her actively. I'm going to hear her out. I'm going to reframe the conversation so at the other end, an hour from now, she comes out of this re-enthused, her morale is up. I'm going to make sure that I don't let this good employee fall through the cracks. Okay, takes an hour. And what does she leave? If you've done your job well, she's back where she was before the bad event. You've negated the negative. Now, repeat, she comes in, sits down with a guy, a gifted boss like Alan Rosenshine. She starts to beef about the client. What does he say? Well, he's got his touchstones. Again, I picture him as actual rocks. I know they're just words, they're thoughts. But he slides one over. He says, you know, life's a negotiation, and we really shouldn't show the client anything we aren't delighted to run. What happens to that conversation? If all goes well, the young woman says, you know, I'm really not a very good negotiator. I wish I were better at that. Who here is good at that? Oh, the gifted boss is in heaven. Now you have a chance to say, oh my God, you got to go talk to Melinda. I want you to go to one of her presentations. She could sell a cat to mice. She is so good. You got to watch her in action. Learn from her. Go talk to her about it. She's amazing. Now, how long did that conversation take? Other conversation took an hour to negate the negative. This conversation takes 3 minutes. And suddenly that person isn't just negating the negative, that person's out to do something better than they've ever done it before. That's the difference between the average boss and these gifted bosses. Enormous time saving because they've encapsulated wisdom. And some of you around your offices have encapsulated wisdom. And in a minute, I want to come out there and invite you to tell me some of those things. I'm working on a book on this subject called The Sentence That Changes the World, changes how people see the world. So I'm hoping we have some some thoughts. Well, you think about that, because most people aren't even aware of these touchstones, even though they use them all the time. Think about that, and let me tell you a story about how I discovered one touchstone very useful to me. I got interested in energy flows in organizations. And you know how you walk into some stores and you just feel lifted? You just feel better. And then you walk into another place and it's just the opposite. You feel the life force being sucked out of you. Well, this is before anybody even says anything. It isn't just what people say to you. There's all these factors that influence how you feel in a place. Part of it's the lighting. They have nice lighting here instead of the usual fluorescence. In fact, you know where the worst lighting is in the world? Dressing rooms at retail stores. People, I guess, say we're going to spend all our money out here doing displays. And then, well, that's a dressing room. We'll put a fluorescent tube up there. As if that isn't a display. That's the most important display in the world. That's the person looking at themselves. That's the display. And why isn't this the nicest place in the store? A place that makes you feel great? Why isn't there fabulous lighting that makes you just glow? I don't know, but some people are working on it, I'm sure. Anyway, I'm interested in this. I know it's way out there. It's New Agey. So I go to a New Age conference where there's related stuff going on. Where was it? Santa Fe, New Age. So I get there and I discover one of the afternoon breakout sessions is Brazilian drummers. And the brochure tells me that in Brazil, they use drummers, the big conga drums, to get in touch with the body's energy systems, the chakras, as we would call them. Well, I'm there. What do the Brazilians know? I don't. I can hardly wait. But I get there and something's weird. It's the middle of the afternoon. It's an ugly room with fluorescent lights. But I walk in, there's no tables, no chairs, nothing. And then there's almost no men. There's like 100 women and 5 guys. And soon I discover that you don't just listen to the Brazilian drums, you dance to the Brazilian drums. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm going to dance, I kind of like the dim light. I kind of like to have a couple of beers going, you know what I mean? But here I am, I'm there, I'm going to make the best of it, I'm there to learn. Okay, I'm out dancing under the fluorescent lights. And then it got truly awful. We were told to divide into 2 groups. The first group forms a big circle. Second group forms a big outer circle. We are now paired up. I am paired up with a young woman who mentions that she's a dance major in college. Me, economics. You see me dance, you'd go, economics. So anyway, we start, well, here's the assignment. Picture this. This nice young woman is instructed to sit on the carpet. We are to lock eyes, do not break eye contact. When the drums start, I am to dance. Every time the rhythm changes, I am to dance a different emotion. Now, I know some of you are thinking, what fun? Me, I'm thinking, is there any way to slip under the carpet and get out of there? I couldn't think of a way out. I'm stuck doing this. I tried to do this. It was just horrible. It was even worse for this poor young girl, I think, who was having to watch me try to dance emotions. Anyway, it's over. I can't wait to leave. I can't wait to forget about it. And then it hits me. This is an experience with touchstone value. Anytime something really good or really bad happens, it has touchstone potential. And this is now my touchstone for humiliation. Here's how it works. You know how you're asked sometimes to do something embarrassing? Somebody will say, would you be in this skit? Or would you speak impromptu? Or in my case, sometimes I'm asked to do interviews. Like not long ago, somebody calls me, would you do a radio interview? And I say, sure. And they say, when I call in, they say, oh, by the way, this is national syndication. This would be all over the country. Now, that's a point at which I would have gotten nervous. I would have had butterflies. Not now. I simply pull out my touchstone. And I say to myself, what's the potential for humiliation of this radio interview compared to dancing to the Brazilian drummers? Nothing to it. I can no longer be embarrassed thanks to that touchstone. I turned that horrible experience into wisdom. Okay, I hope I've given you enough time. I'm bringing a pen in the hopes that somebody tells me something I can write down. I'd love to hear some touchstones you use in your office. Around our office, we say experiments never fail all the time. That tells us, hey, just trying something new is a victory. We got out of our rut. We got out of that box. We tried something new. People have things you say around your office? Oh, yes, sir. Stand up here so we all stare at you, would you? And speak into that.
Go ahead and stare at me. I'm going to switch it, though. This was one that was done on me rather than one I use. A long time ago. A very young employee starting out. I made a mistake. I'm feeling absolutely awful. Go into the boss and say, here's the mistake I made. You know, I'm feeling head down. And he said, don't worry about it. The only one that never made a mistake, never did anything. And I got a lot of them out there.
All right. Very nice. Thank you. Yes, I had for that. Anybody else? Somebody else have a saying you use around the office? Yes. Can you project for us? Or here comes a microphone. Hold on. We have a crack team of microphone people on their way. There you go. Stand up. Would you tell us who you are?
My name is Gloria, and I teach high school fashion design. And one thing I like to tell the students is when they're cutting out fabric, sometimes they'll slip and make a mistake. So I just tell them that when they make a mistake, that's just an opportunity to be creative.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Yes. Thank you for that. Okay, this side of the room, you're falling down. We have one over here. Someone? Anyone? Yes, sir. If you would, a microphone for this gentleman. If you'd stand up and tell us your name. So far, nobody's gotten to that part.
Hi, it's Sean Levinson from USM.
Yes.
What we often say to people around the office is, if you don't know the difference between management and leadership, you're a manager.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay, anybody else? Anybody else? You can see if, yes, if you could find your way. It's to your right, there's a microphone coming. Stand up, would you? Tell us who you are.
Actually, I'm a student and don't have an office, but save my bedroom. But all the same, where I work, where people do things like bicker about management or other employees or interactions with customers, and I always we all tell each other, all you can do is keep your side of the street clean. Meaning, if you're wholeheartedly satisfied with the job that you did, then sometimes, 1 in a million, but sometimes you get those people that don't want to be satisfied. And you can only do so much before you take that energy onto yourself.
Very nice. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, there's a young woman here who, we have a microphone on its way.
I'm Holly Bastow-Shoup, and I am at North Dakota State University in Fargo, and it's rather appropriate right now. We always ask, how high is the water? Because we have been flooded a number of different times, and our office is in the basement. We used to refer to it as the garden level. We no longer do that, in that we have been evacuated a number of times from our space. So in relationship to how bad things can get, we ask, how high is the water?
Very nice, yes. Okay, if we'll press ahead. Let me tell you one of my favorites that I heard recently. Pittsburgh Steelers, their head coach, a young guy named Mike Tomlin. I saw an interview with him, and they were talking about there'd been another scandal, some player gotten in trouble, not one of his, but they were talking about off-the-field scandals, and turns out that Mike Tomlin does not have any kind of rule book or guidebook for off the field. Instead, he has 4 words. Don't be the guy. Right? The guy who people are talking about, the guy in the news, that's it. And he said to the interviewer, this is the part I loved, fits right into this gifted boss. He said, you know, I could write a bunch of rules, that's the easy part. But if I wrote them, I'd have to enforce them. That's how you become an anti-bureaucrat. That's how you decide not to spend your time defending that bottom line. Okay, let me see what I have time to talk about. I mentioned policing. Let me give you an example of gifted leadership from a police department, because this is something I wish you'd go and try. Madison, Wisconsin Police Department had a guy as their chief who was an anti-bureaucrat. And that's really what I'm talking about here, how to get up to be a gifted boss. You have to find ways to elude the bureaucracy. And so he was looking at all the things they do that they could stop doing. Interesting question. What can we do that we could stop doing? And one of the things that came up was performance reviews, you know, the annual employee reviews. Most managers dread them. And it turns out, there's some research on this, that most employees find them demotivating. So why do them? A good boss should be giving you regular feedback, not this annual feedback glop dumped on you one afternoon. So they're going to get rid of them, but the bureaucracy strikes back. Turns out to be accredited, you have to do annual employee reviews. So they say, in effect, what can we do that looks like an annual review, but it isn't, and it's actually useful? And they decided this. They asked every employee, they said, listen, find a problem and solve it. Keep a notebook, you know, this will be your project for the year. Keep a notebook, keep notes on what you did, and then at the end of the year, you can turn it in, and it will go into your file, or not, up to you. Now, that is bureaucrat code speak for, you don't really have to do this. So they created this thing people didn't really have to do, but some people did. They got rid of the bad thing, the employee reviews that were taking up a lot of time for no good end. So they say, okay, if you want to do this, you can. Well, there was one police officer, who discovered that on his beat was one of the highest accident rates in town, one intersection in his beat. So it's not his problem, that's traffic engineering. But he's got this assignment, he says, I'll give it a try. So he sits there and watches traffic, he reads some accident reports, he talks to some business owners in the area. He believes he's discovered the problem. People are doing this little cut-around maneuver to get onto this major street. So he goes to traffic engineering and says two magic things. He says, you know, we got these assignments, these notebooks, I'm doing mine. Could you guys give me a hand? I'd like to try an experiment. It's magic word one. People hate to change, but they like to experiment. I'd like to try an experiment. Could we put up some of those safety barrels things, reflective barrels, and see what happens? That's the other magic phrase, see what happens. Now I said how jobs were designed to be dull. This is how you counteract that. This is where you take on a project where you don't know the outcome. Everything about your job is designed for you to be successful, which means that you're going to minimize any kind of risk and uncertainty, that you are going to be sure to succeed. Sounds like a good thing, but you take away all the suspense, all the adventure, all the mystery. If you want it back, you have to put it back. Well, that's what this person did. They said, I have this hypothesis. Let's see what happens. Sure enough, accident rate plummets. Traffic engineering puts in some planter boxes. It becomes permanent. But here's the neat thing. How do you suppose that police officer feels about that intersection? You know what? That's now his intersection. Every time he drives by it, oh, there's mine. If people come in from out of town, you think he goes out of his way to head through that intersection? Oh, that's my intersection. Used to be dangerous. Not now. Not because of me. Now here's somebody who's discovered the magic. And the police force had the sense to send out reports on all these experiments to the mayor, the city council, everybody. Now, all over town, parks are being reclaimed, accidents are being reduced by people who are doing things that aren't in their job description. Why? Because somebody was enough of an anti-bureaucrat. I met a guy who does this in retailing, a consultant named David Wing. I don't know if any of you have run into him. But he told me one of his touchstones is that every employee should own a piece of the business. And he didn't mean financially. He didn't mean stock or any of that stuff. He means that some part of the business they should be the expert on. He said, for instance, I had one young woman who worked for me who was fabulous whenever a customer would return things. Clothing store, people would bring something back, they'd leave with twice as much as they came to bring back. So he goes to her and he says, listen, you are so good at this. I want you to teach everybody how to do this. I want you to be our expert on this, and at one of our employee meetings, I want you to explain it to everybody else. And she goes, well, I don't know what I do. He says, well, watch yourself, figure it out, and report on it at an upcoming meeting. So she owned a piece of the store. Was that in her job description? No. But he was enough of a gifted boss. And the beauty of it is, you can assign even the worst jobs. I know places where one of these gifted bosses has gone to an employee and said, you know, you are so great with angry customers. And suddenly that person gladly handles all the angry customers. People are so hungry to have a gift, have it recognized, put it to use, to do something outside the box. And I mean the box on the org chart that defines their little function. People love to go outside of that box. As opposed to most creativity activities where people decide they're going to make a change and they go from one box into the next box, which is labeled out of the. They never quite escape the box. But people want to go outside those little org chart boxes. Well, one last story, and I'll be done. And by the way, they put that nice table out there with some of my books. It was very nice of them to do. And if you have questions, I'll be out there afterwards. And also, if you have stories, I write newspaper columns, 2 a week. So I have 2 deadlines. I'm in the story business. If you have a good story, if you have thought of a touchstone that you thought, oh, I wish I'd told him that, please stop. I'll put a stack of business cards on that same table with the books. If you don't have time to talk, just grab a card and email me or write me. And let me end with this. I decided to write a little book a few years ago about high achievers. And I'd been studying them the way I'd studied these great bosses. And I was trying to come up with some label for them that captured the duality of their personalities. And what I mean by that is, studying these people, they're very competitive. They're intensely competitive. But yet, it's not just ambition. It's something else. It's this desire to improve things for the team, for the customers. There's a beautiful purity about it that makes it lively and fun. And you hear a lot of laughter around these kind of people. So I ended up describing them as laughing warriors. The warrior spirit is the competitiveness. The laughing is this lightness around them. So, having come up with that name, I then decided I would go and research warrior culture to see if there was anything there useful. And there was so many things, particularly in the samurai culture, most beautiful of the warrior cultures. And they did an odd thing, the samurai. They would go out before a battle and strike a pose in front of the enemy and call out their name and their accomplishments. Why? In the hopes that the enemy would send out a worthy opponent. What they understood was there wasn't any glory in beating some rookie and beating some worn-down old warrior. They wanted someone that was a match for their capabilities. Better yet, somebody even better than they were, that they could take the next step up. You know, send out a giant. Don't send out some rookie. So I thought about that idea of a worthy opponent, and it ties into what I said about jobs being designed to be so doable. And how many of us get to fight a worthy opponent? Yeah, and I started looking at most people's jobs, and they end up having hard fights all day long against little opponents. It's like a samurai fighting pygmies. And these are nasty, armed and dangerous pygmies, rushing at your shins all day long. And at the end of the day, you have a pile of dead pygmies, and you go home exhausted. And your spouse, your roommate, whoever says, "How was your day?" And you say, same old, same old. And they say, "No, really, tell me, how was your day? What'd you do today?" And you think, and you say, "Well, let me think about that. Let me think, well, Well, we had the pre-planning session for the new task force on better committees. And what can your spouse say to that? You want to get a pizza. But I hope for you, I wish for you, I long for you to make a decision that today you're not just going to, the next day you're in the office, you're not going to just spend your time trying to catch up, that you're going to set that stuff aside for a minute. Let the bureaucracy take care of that. And that one fine day, you'll decide that you want a worthy opponent, that you want to step outside your box and call out a dragon to fight, call out a giant to take on. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.